So good morning. My name is Michelle Burton, and I am the principal owner for CoreTech Revolution. So CoreTech has been in business for about 15 years. It's coming up on 16 years this April. We've evolved over the years from a website company to more strategic technology consulting, primarily in the healthcare industry, although we do have clients that go outside of healthcare. So we're very well-rounded. We serve clients all across the country. I think we've been, from California to Florida and everywhere in between. So we are familiar with working with folks in all time zones. We do a lot of work around project and program management, as well as strategic planning, organizational change, and restructuring. So that's kind of what we do. Before we get started, I did want to take a moment and introduce you to Jane. So Jane has over 30 years of experience with companies of all sizes, again, primarily in healthcare and technology. She's held several senior executive positions, and we are very grateful to have her here with CoreTech as our strategy partner. And so that just means that she works with clients to help them figure out what their next steps are, how to get from, level A to level B and so on. So Jane's been a great asset to the team, and we're super excited she's giving this presentation today. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. We are recording this, and we'll send out the recording and the slide deck to all the attendees once the presentation is complete. If you have questions at any time throughout the presentation, you can put them in the chat window, or you can click the question button, and we'll get to those questions during the Q&A. And once the survey is complete, we're going to send you this out, like I said, or once the presentation is complete, we're going to send this out to you, like I said. And there's also going to be a short survey attached. If you could just take a minute to take that survey and provide your feedback, that just helps us enhance these presentations for future presentations. So our agenda for today is exactly what it says in the description. We're going to be identifying organizational goals, helping you understand what those are, helping you understand how to create them, communicate them to your team, and get buy-in across the organization, because that's really key to having success with your goals. If you have any questions, like I said, we'll get to those at the end, and then we're happy to follow up with you after the webinar if there's any additional questions that you might have that go outside the scope of what we're talking about. So with that said, I will turn it over to Jane to begin the presentation.
Hey, good morning. We're going to talk about goals and how to align them. And as we all know, if our goals are aligned, it feels good. You feel like you're making forward progress. You feel like you're developing, moving the company forward and moving yourself forward. As opposed to if they're not aligned, it feels like total chaos. People are competing with one another, and we're going in circles instead of going forward. So when you have a common purpose, you do feel like you're moving forward, but sometimes it's hard to reconcile that you're really in the right place as opposed to a more chaotic environment. And I once had a facilitator have us do a lesson to just share with us what this would look like. So imagine us all standing shoulder to shoulder in a line facing forward. And we're told, take a step forward. Well, we all take a step forward, given our stride a little bit different, but we're still in a line and we're still moving forward, and we're moving in a common direction. Now imagine that we're in that same place. We're told, close your eyes, spin around 3 times, and now take a step forward. Well, depending upon how you spin and where you spin, we are literally could be all over the room, walking into each other, bumping into each other, and knocking each other down. And that would be the chaotic side. And if you just remembered that visual, somehow that always it nails it for me with, okay, am I spinning in circles here and bumping into people, or are we moving forward? When you have a common agenda, we really do feel like we're working from the same page and the same script. Whereas competing ones, you feel like when you ask somebody to help you, that you're not their priority, that they have something else that's either more important for them to get done, and that they'll get to you when they can. And it's frustrating if you're trying to get your priorities done, and then you're not making forward progress. So think of a customer service example. When you have called in before to a customer service organization, you kind of know when they have their act together or not, because they truly listen to what you're saying. They take care of your whole problem. And by the time you hang up, you think, that wasn't so bad. Versus the other times when you're transferred to 4 or 5 different departments, you have to repeat your story every single time. They can only do a little piece of it. And you hang up thinking, my goodness, I still don't even know if it's going to be fixed or if I'm going to have to go through that again. And that's when you see the competing agendas and people really are not on the same page. So when I was in college 100 years ago, I rode crew. And it was always fun because at the beginning of the season, regardless of how many years you had rowed in a boat, you had new people coming in. And for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with the boat, in the boats I rowed in, you had one oar. So you were either rowing on the left-hand side of the boat or the right-hand side of the boat. And you needed to balance each other out as teammates. So in the beginning of the season, that boat was wobbling all over the place. And if we had any strength, we were going in circles because there was usually one side that was stronger than others. And you had water splashing and you couldn't help but laugh, but it was a mess. You weren't going to win any races. By the end of the season, when we learned how to work together and how to get in stride with one another, those oars would hit the water at the same time, and that boat would literally glide across the top of the water. You wouldn't even feel like you were touching the water. And as soon as you hit that place where you were hitting, your oars were hitting at the same place, you knew it. The whole experience felt entirely different, and you knew you had a chance of winning races at that point. The whole team knew it. And so that's what we're talking about with goal alignment, is when your whole team understands that they're moving forward in a very different way. And so just take a second and think about it. Think about which teams have you been on or have you led as senior managers that you knew they just had their act together and you were sailing right along beautifully, versus which ones of those were a little bit more wobbly and needed some help. And that's what we're going to talk about during this whole session is how do we make sure that we are aligned so that you get that good feeling moving forward and you can lead your teams in that way. So we talk about the real goals. And the real goals are the milestones necessary to achieve your purpose. It's really, what do you need to do to get to the end game? How are you going to succeed? Why are you here? Is it to keep the company in business? Is it to reach a milestone? Is it to complete a sale? But what are the goals aligned to that? And some are more obvious than others. If you think about a common orientation, senior managers need to be able to see and tell their teams how the goals align to the whole organization. You really need to be able to paint a picture that tells your team where are they going, how do they link with the others, why do they even care about this goal, and what's important for them. Because what you're doing is you're creating the foundation for everything else as you go forward. So think if your common goal is a revenue number, it's to hit 3 million in revenue for first quarter. And you really need that to keep the doors open if you're at a young startup company or something. So when you're talking to your team, the sales team will view that in one way. They know they need to close the deals for 3 million. When you're talking to customer service, the conversation may be more around, we need to hit the 3 million in revenue. I need you to help keep our customers happy. I need you to give me quick alerts when things aren't working well. So depending upon the department, as senior managers, you really need to be able to link everybody's work in a common way. Aligning with rewards is absolutely critical. When people say that they really don't know what a company values or what's important, you just look at what are you getting paid for? What are you getting bonuses for? That's what really matters. The rewards should be aligned to the things that are important to the company and not to the unimportant things. So there was a startup company that I had been working with, and it was in a high-tech area. And their only mission was shareholder revenue. They honestly didn't care about anything else. I hate to say it. It was, product was less important. Customer service was less important. It was how to maximize the shareholder value. And that was the question that they asked every single day. And that's how bonuses were issued. If that value went up, you got a bonus. If everything else was going in the right direction and that value wasn't impacted, you didn't get anything. It was very, very clear to the organization what was important. Visibility is making it clear to everybody, making sure that everybody recognizes the vision, the goals, where you're going, whether that is poster boards or ongoing conversations or any other kind of reports on, that you're giving out on a regular basis or not. By doing that, your goals become visible not only internally to the organization, but externally. When I was I was working with a little tech startup at one point, and we really wanted to pilot it or have a healthcare company work with us. And right off the bat, the name that came to top of mind was Humana. Humana was known at that point in time as being the tech leaders in healthcare insurance and healthcare benefits. They were proud of that internally. That was their goals. That was their metrics. All their tech team and sales team could spout that off. And so everybody else in the industry knew that. So that's what it's talking about for visibility. It's just really cohesive and everybody knows where you're at. And then there's ongoing measurement. You need to measure it. You need to know where you're making progress. And how do you do that? You have, as senior managers, you have managers that you need to report up to. And how do you tell them that you're doing a good job or that you're moving forward? Or how do you tell them you're in trouble? How do you tell your own team that they're right on track and they're clicking along versus they need to pick up the pace or we need to redirect? And if you think about it, it's whatever you're measuring and you're tracking is what your team is looking at as the real goals. So if you're saying that all projects need to be delivered on time, and you're always asking them, are we on schedule? Are we on schedule? Are we on schedule? They pretty much know that hitting deadlines and timeliness is your priority. That's what's important, and that's what you're measuring. As opposed to if you're saying, are the customers happy? Did you meet their needs? Did you do whatever you had to do to make them happy? That's a very different measure. And so as managers, the ongoing measurements that you're sharing with them and the conversations that you're having with them are very telling as to what's important to people. So Michelle's going to talk a little bit about the different types of goals that there are.
Yeah, so there's several different types of goals, but the key ones that I think you see in business are pretty straightforward, right? You have your top-down goals, your bottom-up, zero-based, commit, and stretch. And I won't spend a lot of time defining them because they're pretty self-explanatory, but I just want to quickly go through them and make sure that everyone's on the same page. So your top-down goal is just that. That's your executive goal. So it comes from typically the highest level of leadership, and it filters down. And these goals are your more broadly based goals that the remaining goals throughout the organization are based on, right? So there are going to be board goals, financial goals, increased corporate value goals, those types of things. And then your bottom-up goals, these are what I would call your supporting goals, right? So it's what happens at the lowest level to feed up to that higher level goal. How do you make if it's a financial goal, how do you make that financial goal happen? So for example, if your larger goal or your top-down goal was increased project delivery, your specific team goal might be to send your team to classes to improve their abilities to deliver the projects that are assigned to them. So you might look at something like Agile training or ITIL or something like that. So that's really what you're going for when you're looking at those bottom-up type goals. And then zero-based, Jane, I think you had a really great way of describing that. So I'll let you go over that one before I hit the last two.
Okay, zero-based is really when you're starting from scratch. And so it's not the same goal that you've had every year. So if you constantly have a customer service goal or a revenue goal, this one is more different. Think of it as more of a strategic goal. So this year we are going to try to introduce a new product that is very consumer directed in a space that we've never done before. That would be a zero-based goal. You have no baseline, you're starting from scratch, and each year it's something entirely different. You're starting all over again. So oftentimes it could be tied to the strategic plan, and initially it could be zero-based, and then if it turns into something, it can move on into one of the other types of goals. But it's an original idea oftentimes that you're just starting from ground zero. Michelle?
Thank you. Yeah. So then you have your commit goal. This goal is an absolute. It's the kind of thing that if you miss it, there's a penalty. So good examples of this goal would be like government mandates, especially if you work in the healthcare industry, it's known for government mandates. Your Blue Cross Blue Shield Association mandates, your reporting mandates, all those fun things. Or, you know, it could be something more abstract that's specific to an organization. I worked with a client once that had to meet a specific project goal because the building that their servers were in was being decommissioned, and by decommissioned, I mean destroyed. So that was definitely a very absolute goal that they had to hit in order to achieve what they were looking for. And your stretch goal is just that. It's a stretch goal. It's above and beyond. So this is the goal that, like, oftentimes is used in sales environments. A great example is if you had a goal to achieve 1.5 million or $1 million in sales, your stretch goal might be to hit 1.5 million. And I always like this goal always reminds me of a movie that I saw. It's called Facing the Giants. And so in this movie, you know, there's a football coach, obviously teaching a football team. And, you know, he asks one of the kids on the team, how far do you think you could crawl with someone on your back? And by crawl, I mean like hands and feet, not knees. And, you know, he asked the kid, do you think you could get to the 10-yard line, the 20-yard line? How far do you think you could get? And of course, this kid said something like 20 yards, right? So they blindfold him. They put somebody on his back, and he goes the entire length of the football field. So I know that this is a fictional movie, right? But the point remains the same. Oftentimes, we hold ourselves accountable to a goal based on what we perceive our ability is. And in reality, our abilities go much farther than what we think they are. And so that's why stretch goals are important, so that you can get past that 20-yard line and go the entire length of the football field when you don't think you can. So the best way to create goals, and this is, you know, something I think we've all heard before, is by having SMART goals, right? You want to have goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and results focused and time bound. And when you do this often enough, when you create your goals in this fashion, eventually it becomes second nature. So instead of spending time, defining what each of those criteria is, because I think we've probably all heard about SMART goals a lot of different times, I thought I would just share with you an example that is more recent from something that we've been working on inside CoreTech. So this year we had a goal, or I should say last year, we had a goal to increase our sales pipeline. And so that would be, our top-down goal. And we broke that into different pieces of work. So for the sake of this example, the specific piece of work that we were focused on is increasing our social media presence on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Seems pretty straightforward. The way that we decided to measure this was by developing a social media outline and a tracking spreadsheet. And so this allowed us to track every time we had an interaction on one of those platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook, where it was coming from, what the interaction was, and what happened as an end result. And so we needed to track that so that we could see if our goal of using social media was in fact an attainable one that was going to increase our pipeline. And so one of the things that we had to do was evaluate our internal knowledge. Did we have people on the team that had the knowledge and the time to spend on social media to build these platforms up as a means of one of the paths to build our sales pipeline? And if there were gaps in doing that, how did we address those gaps? And so the way that we kept it relevant and results focused was to talk it through with the team. And we spent a lot of time talking about, and Jane can attest to this, what are the benefits of using social media as a means to build our sales pipeline, and what would be the pitfalls if we didn't achieve this goal, and do the benefits outweigh those pitfalls or risks? And after lots of conversations, we determined that, it was worth, and we have other goals tied to the sales pipeline, right? But we decided it was worth exploring what social media could bring to us as a benefit, and which of those three platforms was going to be most beneficial for us. And so we kind of time-bound this experiment, so to speak, to 6 months so that we could track and evaluate the overall results. And what we found over a period of 6 months, actually it's only been 5 months since we implemented this goal, is that we improved our pipeline conversations by over 75% in the last 5 months, based on what we were doing inside those platforms. Now, different platforms have different results. I did not split out the percentages, but I can tell you that LinkedIn has been the most beneficial for us. And so we've decided to set additional goals around this particular top-down goal related to social media, to see how social media can not only increase our conversation and putting people in the pipeline, but now to take it one step further and see how social media folks inside our pipeline can then increase our revenue over the period of the next year. So that's just a really great example, something we've had success with. They're not always successful. Some of your goals are not always successful, but this is one we've had a lot of great success with, and it's just an example of how we used SMART goals to achieve those results.
Hey, and one of the most important things, and Michelle touched upon that, is how do you communicate the goals? If everybody has a common understanding and how they fit into the picture, it's a much easier and better process than if everybody feels disjointed. And communication is a process. It's not, I've told them once and I'm done. It's continual reinforcement. So as senior managers, you're setting the high-level goals and you're continually reinforcing what that means to your mid-managers and to your front lines and how it ties into any work. that you're asking them to do. Because as we all know, organizations change over time and goals sometimes change. If a merger gets thrown in, or you're acquired by somebody, or there's a disrupting technology that enters, or product that enters into your environment, you need to be able to turn on a dime and figure out what that is. So goals change. So it's your job, our job as senior managers, to be communicating that on an ongoing basis. So let's walk through an example of how that might work. So if you're thinking of customer service, and I worked at Anthem at one point, and I was in charge of operations, which included customer service for the central region. And as a company, we had high-level customer service goals to hit. I believe the number was between 80 or 90% of an aggregate number. And those numbers were important in order for us to keep the Cross and the Shield brand. If we wanted to use the brand, we had to hit certain Blue Cross Blue Shield Association metrics. It was important as we were acquiring other companies. Nobody wants to be acquired by somebody who doesn't take customer service seriously or who doesn't care about their customers. So there were a lot of different reasons why that was an important goal. So as you roll down to the managers, or the mid-level managers in customer service, we had a very specific number, say 80% satisfaction, and that would have been measured by first call resolution, how fast do we answer the phone, what were our satisfaction scores based upon surveys from the members, and a variety of different other things that rolled into that. And then you have our frontline folks. If you're answering the phones, are 80% answered within 4 rings? At least 85% of the time, are you solving that customer's problem right then and there without transferring them, without making them call back, without having to do a whole lot of follow-up? And what was the average time on hold? So when you think through that, it's easy to have that high-level goal. It's always important to be translating, here's what it means to you, and here's how you're contributing to the bigger picture. Because it wasn't uncommon to have somebody say, well, you know, I didn't quite hit my metrics answering the phone, but that's okay. What difference do I make? And if you've got 100 people thinking that way, nobody's hitting their goals. And so it's important to reinforce that they are truly the voice of the customer. They are Anthem to whoever's on the other end of the phone. And reinforcing and communicating that with your team, and then with their managers, so that their managers make sure they've got the tools that they need to be able to do that, literally builds that whole communication pipeline all the way up and reinforces it. Michelle, I think you have an example with an IHI manifest, not with IHI, with an HIE.
Yeah,
sorry.
I do that all the time with the HIE, right? Yeah. So I did. I had a client that I worked with, Health Information Exchange out in California, and they rolled out a new software application, and they were merging all of the HIEs into California into one big HIE, which, you know, if you know how big California is, and I think we all do, that's a pretty big undertaking. But one of the things, as we rolled out their new software application, that we uncovered is that their delivery to their end customer of features and enhancements inside their HIE platform was terribly low, to the point that their customers' expectation was that they wouldn't get new features or functionality for 2 to 3 years. So what was even the point in, you know, making a request to make a change, because they felt like it fell on deaf ears. And so one of the things that their senior leadership implemented was, we have to improve product delivery to our end customers. And so I was working with their team to try and figure out, how do we do that internally inside the organization so that customers are seeing regular and tangible results and feeling like they're being heard. And so the thing that we focused on primarily as part of this goal was the project delivery piece. So I rolled out, I wouldn't call it a true agile project management process, but it was a modified agile process that would work for their organization. And as part of that, it was helping the senior leadership team understand why agile was important and helping them get behind that process. Because if they didn't support it at the top level, right, it was going to fall apart at the lower levels. The first time somebody made a request and a customer cried, "This is so important, it has to be done before everything else." If senior leadership took that approach and then implemented that inside their organization, the agile process was going to fall apart and their delivery was going to fall apart, and that was part of the larger problem, right? So first for me was helping the senior leadership team understand why this new process was important and how they needed to support it at the top level and communicate down so that everybody else would follow it, right? So once I had them on board, then it was a matter of training the managers, helping them understand what the process was, helping them understand why they were key to setting priorities for things that were coming into their request pipeline for these enhancements, and helping them understand how their involvement was key to the success with the developers, because they had to set clear messages. We have 100 things in our queue to do, but inside of a sprint for Agile, it might be 2 weeks. So we only have 2 weeks to do 100 things? No, we have to pick the top 5 things that we can do inside that 2 weeks, right? And then we have to stick to that. And we as managers inside the organization are going to be the ones who decide what those 5 top priorities are that we're going to focus on in the next 2 weeks. And then they communicated that down to the frontline folks who were doing the development work. And so it was very clear at that point, right? Senior leadership said, we're following this agile process. We're not going to listen to the loudest screaming customer, and we're going to support our team. The manager said, we've got 100 things in queue. We are going to decide what the top 5 things are. And then by the time it got down to your frontline folks who were doing the work, they knew exactly what they needed to do. They knew they had the management team's buy-in, and they knew they had the support of their senior leadership team. And before you knew it, after a couple months of just working with that team and training them on that process, they were starting to achieve that goal. And their customers were starting to see things being delivered. Now, the things weren't always big. Sometimes they were small, right? But they were seeing things delivered. And that was really the key for that group, is to be able to show their end customers that it didn't take 2 or 3 years to deliver something, that they could deliver it more quickly. And so that goal was a huge success because they followed that process and had support at all levels inside the organization.
That's a great example. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about how you report it and kind of go the opposite way. And we'll go back to the Anthem example that I was talking about. So you've got your customer service reps who are answering the phones, dealing with other issues on a daily basis. And they need to roll their information up to a way where managers can get a higher level of metrics to see where are the gaps, where do they need to send in reinforcements, where do they need new technology or action plans or what have you. And then you need to be able to report it up to senior leadership and the CEO ultimately at Anthem, who wanted that information to be able to share. So at the front line, what we had all these fancy Excel spreadsheets and numbers, and your phone stats popped up, and people are busy. They're not looking at all that stuff. Managers are, if they think there's a problem, maybe. But frontline, no. Unless you are on the bubble of being in one category of doing great versus the other, you weren't looking at those things. You were busy taking care of customers. So what we started to do is we put flip charts up at every elevator that had a smiley face. It was either a big smile, it was a frown, or it was medium. And that meant this is how our stats are today. We're doing great, we're doing okay, or we got to pick up the pace. And everybody knew immediately what that smiley face meant. They'd go back, they'd kind of look at what could they do to contribute. They'd ask their colleagues, you need a little help? you getting more phone calls? Do you need to do more research that I can help you with? It created a very different conversation and a different environment. People wanted to help each other. And again, I'm talking about a black magic marker smiley face on a flip chart right near the elevator. It was nothing glitzy, nothing fancy. And we still had all the metrics that we could roll up from the system, and that's what the managers needed. On a monthly basis, the managers really needed to know, are we hitting our call stats, meaning are we resolving issues the first time people call in? And if not, why aren't we, and what do we need to do differently? Are we answering the phone fast enough? If not, do I need more people on the phone? Or do I need to train in a different skill level, et cetera? So the managers needed that monthly information so that they could truly analyze what their staffing models looked like, what their training plans needed to be, and how they could take care of their team. And then they also needed that to roll up to senior management, because on a quarterly basis, at a minimum, we shared how we were doing as a company with the CEO and the senior team. And at least on an annual basis, the CEO had to share it with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association and the other trade organizations. So that's why all the reporting up is so important. It's at a much more granular level at the front line, but they're the ones that can impact it the most. The senior managers just need to know, are we going to be in trouble or aren't we? And if we are, give me early warning signs or tell me what I can do to help you get out of it. And that's often where we miss the boat by not reporting properly, is if we don't see enough information and we're not really looking at it to figure out how do we make it better, you get into a world of trouble, and then it's hard to dig out. Whereas if you can nip it in the bud, if you have 3 of those frowny faces in a row at the elevator, it's like, okay, what's going on? Do we have people out sick? Is it flu season and everybody's calling in to know what their benefits are? Do we roll out a new product and nobody understands what it is, so we can't help them? But you can figure that out pretty fast if you're reporting in a proper way. So the last part, or not the last part, but a significant part, and the last part of this conversation is really about getting organizational buy-in. We talked about alignment of goals, and they really need to be relevant to your team. If I don't understand how I'm contributing to the big goal, it doesn't really mean anything to me. My reward system may not line up with where the company's going. You may not get the best performance out of me if I don't know what you need me to do to help you get to where you want to be. So tell me that you need me to close 5 deals worth $250,000 in the first quarter in order for the company to stay in business. I understand that. I know what I need to do. And that aligns, that builds the alignment and the common purpose. And keep telling me how I'm doing. Keep those results visible. Don't just hit me with it once a quarter, once a year, and say you missed the mark. Tell me as often as is appropriate. Some metrics you can do daily, some are quarterly, some are weekly. It depends upon what type of environment. Sales is usually a longer period of time before you look at the metrics, but not necessarily a sales pipeline, as Michelle talked about. She can look at that any day and see what new sales are in the pipeline and are we making progress. We talked about SMART goals. The goals really need to be measurable, attainable, results focused, and time bound in order for your team to be able to contribute. If they're not, they give up before they even started. If they can't see, if you just tell them increase revenue, and they're in customer service and they don't understand what that means or how it links to the bigger picture, they just kind of shrug their shoulders and go off and do what they do every other day and don't pay any attention to it. And then you get an organization that is more fractured and not moving forward together. And you'll feel it because you'll wonder why. Why aren't people working together and helping each other out? We talked about the ongoing updates and measurements. It's really, really important to be telling people how they're doing. and all along the way. So if they just knocked the ball out of the park, tell them. So you know what, you just handled that customer absolutely beautifully. It was a messy issue, but you took care of it. You resolved their issue. We need more of that. Way to go, keep going. Or you know what, you could have handled that customer a little bit more gently. You could have given them a little freebie to take the sting out of it, because when they get off the phone, we want them to say good things about the company. So next time, maybe do blah, 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 blah. But if you're not doing ongoing updates and measurements and conversations with your team, you're not helping them move forward. You're not helping them develop. And it's important, as one of the things that we didn't talk so much about is goals in organizations shift. And sometimes goals can change midstream. And if you're having the ongoing conversations and measurements, you can help redirect your team and explain why, as long as all these things are happening. That makes sense. So customer service is the priority. But you know what? Right now, we need to focus a little bit more on closing deals. Right now, that's a little bit more urgent for us, so let's shift. So those are the conversations you can have with your team when we're doing the ongoing updates and measurements. And then accountability. Tie performance and rewards together. So I was running a tech organization at one point, and we had outsourced our data center. And so one of the issues that we had is the technology staff, all of our goals and performance were tied to uptime. And uptime not being just uptime, it was, are the claims system up and running and the claims people can process claims? Are the phone systems working so customer service can answer phones? So it was not just the infrastructure, it was the applications, it was the entire technology system. What we found out, again, by the ongoing updates and measurements, we had a daily meeting to talk about what's working and what isn't working. And we found out that a lot of times there were data center issues that our vendor was having, but that impacted us. It meant that we couldn't deliver the applications to our customers. So our claims processing application could be just fine. But if the computer system it was supposed to be running on was having hiccups, our claims processors still couldn't process claims. And we knew that that was our goal, was to make sure that they could do their job. So by having a conversation with our outsourcers, we actually came to the point where they had the exact same goals we did. Their bonus and their reward system was tied to uptime in terms of our claims people can process claims because the application and the infrastructure are working. Our customer service folks can answer the phones and get access to their system because their applications and the infrastructure is working. Once we did that and we put the two companies aligned like that, it was amazing how if something went bump, we had people on the phone before who used to just finger point at each other. All of a sudden they're working shoulder to shoulder with, let's get it fixed, let's get it back up, we got a business to run. And you felt the change. It was very similar to the rowing example that I used earlier. It was all of a sudden we were sailing along and we were one big team that had each other's back for everything. And it felt awesome. I would highly recommend that if you're working with vendors or partners to have some of those conversations, because that was a game changer for us. So Michelle, do you want to talk about some of the key takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Jane kind of summarized them in the last slide, but the key takeaways across this presentation are really just identifying your organizational goals, understanding what they are, sitting down and taking the time to document them and have a really good understanding so that you can then communicate those goals to your team, share with them how they're going to be tracked, and then ultimately gain that organizational buy-in and focus that you're looking for. And those steps are all really key to the process and making sure that you're achieving your goals. So you got to have clarity, you got to have communication, and you got to get buy-in. Otherwise, you're just going to have chaos, and nobody wants chaos. Nobody does. So yeah, at this point, if you have any questions, please go ahead and shoot them in the chat window or in the Q&A bubbles, and we can answer any questions that you might have and go through that. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, I'll just share with you. So today's webinar was about aligning goals. We have one next Tuesday that I personally think is going to be really great about shared values, where we're going to kind of dig in and go, what are your organization's values? How do you know what's important in your organization from a value perspective? And then how do you share that across your team? So for example, just a little spoiler, one value that's particularly important to me inside CoreTech is a faith-based value, which is constantly challenged inside the business world. And so I'm going to share more with you about how that became one of my values and, how I continue to hold true to it and share it inside my organization. So I think it's going to be a really great webinar. The next one coming up on the 18th is around building trust, which is going to be key, I think, to the success of any organization. When you have a team that doesn't trust each other, things start to deteriorate real quick. So how do you fix that trust if it's broken? How do you maintain it if you have it? It's going to be really great and informative. So again, if you haven't signed up for that one, I would strongly recommend you do that. And then the last one for February we're going to have is building the right team and keeping them engaged. So my favorite analogy, Jane hears it all the time, is that you cannot teach a fish to climb a tree. You have to teach a fish to swim. If you're trying to teach someone who is a swimmer how to climb a tree and they don't have legs, they're going to fail. But if you teach them to swim, they're going to be so successful. So you're only successful as a manager as the people that you surround yourself with. So how to make sure that you're building that right team and not teaching a fish to climb a tree, and how you keep them engaged. So a lot of really great webinars coming up. If you haven't signed up for the others, I would strongly recommend that you do. And Jane, it looks like we do have one question about what you do if your management team isn't setting clear goals, or if the goals are constantly changing. At a middle management level, how would you address that issue?
So if you're frontline reporting up to those folks,
yeah,
which is more of a challenge, quite frankly, but it would be clarifying what's most important for me to do, and kind of force their hand a little bit, as much as you comfortably can, with give me a pecking order. What is most important, and what would you like to see? How will I know that I have been successful in this goal? And if you ask often enough, hopefully it will start dawning on them that that's what people need to know. Goals can change a lot depending upon the environment that you're in. If you're in a startup or a small company, they change all the time because you're still figuring out what your products are, what your market is, what's working and what isn't. So I'm assuming that we're not talking about that environment, because most people sign up for that on purpose and know they are. In a corporate world, it happens. It's more discouraging because it doesn't need to happen. Oftentimes it's a sign of a manager that is unclear, him or herself, and they need clarity from their senior managers of what is most important right now. And so there can be multiple goals also that don't obviously link together. One could be a customer satisfaction one. Another one could be revenue, and another could have to do entirely with a strategic plan and new products coming up. And you just need to have clarity on which is more important right now and how do I know if I'm successful. And that could be a challenge for your manager to answer. feel like that's not that I'm not giving a real good answer, but I don't know how to better answer that.
Yeah. Well, and it looks like there is a follow-up question. So specific to the healthcare industry that has changing goals and mandates at a management level, how do you keep those changing goals and mandates from creating chaos throughout your team?
They do create chaos.
That's a great question, yeah.
It's a very good question. They absolutely create chaos. And unless, in the ideal world, and none of us live in the ideal world, you'd carve out a certain amount of capacity in your organization to deal with those changing needs, knowing that you're going to keep having these flybys come in and you're going to have to deal with them. Most organizations don't have the luxury of saying, I've got 3 FTEs who are just going to deal with these fires. So you either find a person who's particularly adept at it, you carve out a percentage of each of your team and let them know these are going to keep changing. I think it goes back to the big part around communication. If you're talking to people and you say, here's our goals right now, but we know that this new HIPAA regulation or tech regulation or ACA regulation is coming down the pike and it will impact us, not sure how, here's what we think, and you're constantly gearing people up for it, I don't think it feels as chaotic because they could at least see it coming. They still need to figure out what they need to do. But again, that's where communication is absolutely critical. Because if you throw it to them at the last point, they look at you like, you didn't know this was going to happen? Like, what kind of a leader are you?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, I worked with a client recently that did have a mandate thrown at them at the last minute, and the leadership team did not know that it was going to be coming, right? It was a Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, you know, they just kind of decided that they were going to do this new thing. And the management team, I was really impressed with the way that they handled that communication. You know, not only did they communicate it, but they were also empathetic to all the teams across the board. We're really sorry we're throwing this at you. We know you have a million other things on your plate. And I think that really just set the tone across the team of people that had to do the work because they felt heard and cared about. And so it was very impressive to see how that particular team handled that unfortunate situation.
I have actually seen organizations make a conscious decision of we're going to pay the penalty. Because we can't disrupt our team. We're working on things that are too critical. So we'll pay the penalty and then we'll put it into our next planning cycle. It doesn't happen very often, but I have seen it happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions right now. So hopefully you guys will sign up for one of the next upcoming webinars. And again, we'll send out this presentation to you for your reference. And if you can take the time to complete our short survey when you receive that email, we would really appreciate it, as it will help us improve the quality of our future webinars. Thank you all so much for attending. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.